Katarina, how do you pronounce your last name?
Pavic.
Pavic. Okay, I've been saying that completely wrong.
Oh, yeah. No, it's okay. I just let people say Pavic, but...
Pavic. That's what I said, but
Yeah.
I should know better.
It's Katarina Pavic, if you say it properly.
That's how you should say your name all the time.
Yeah, I really like scare people, but
That's a very intimidating way to say it.
I'm
That's
just
great.
not, it doesn't match up. Like once I start like giggling and
Do you say
it's not
that
gonna
with your
match
clients?
up.
You show up on set and you're like,
Hello, I'm Katarina Pavic.
Dude,
and then I just start speaking like this and
that's the way to do it.
very confused right off the
That is
bat.
the way to
Yeah.
do it. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I have a list of questions, and we're apparently on a time crunch, but we're going to make the most of it. Are you ready for this?
I am absolutely ready.
I'm going to jump into the first question I have.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, it's not even an official question on here. Tell us about yourself. Like, who are you and what you do?
Okay, so I'm 25 years old. I've been modeling. I model full time, and I've been doing that for about 5 years. I also am a mom. I have a 6-year-old son who is, the main priority in my life, and then probably modeling's next. And I also went to school and graduated from George Mason University.
What did you major in?
I majored in communication with a concentration in media production and criticism. So it goes very well with my personality.
What made you want to pursue that?
I had to make a choice, and I wanted to choose something that lined up the most with my career, and I felt that that major helped me understand what to do behind the camera, and so I thought that it would go hand in hand with, the skills that I need in front of the camera and have a better understanding of just the whole production equation. So
very cool.
I decided that.
So when did you get into modeling?
I got into modeling when I was 13. Wow. I was this tall. I'm 5'11".
You were 5'11" at 13?
Yeah, it was very...
oh my God.
It was very, very challenging.
No kidding.
I'm just kidding. It wasn't challenging, but it wasn't so fun being taller than all of the boys, girls, and teachers, and,
That's pretty cool.
being a giant. So, naturally when you're a 5'11" female, people think, oh, model. So, I'd get that. It's like, oh, you should model. So I sent photos in and I got signed with Elite Chicago. And
where were you living at the time?
I was living in Maryland, okay. But my father lives in Chicago. So I was like, oh, okay. So when I go visit him, I'll be able to do jobs and stuff. I never worked. And then I filled out. Because I shot up. I was so skinny, tall and skinny, and then I filled out. And then now I'm back to like kind of in the middle. But so I didn't work, and when I did fill out, I didn't fit into what they needed me to fit into. So I ditched that idea.
What did they need you to fit into?
Well, a size 2. So like sample sizes.
Okay.
It's, when any company you're modeling clothes, the sample sizes are 0 or 2. So that's why models need to have certain measurements, and then that's for like a standard model, and then plus size models are
right.
a different size. I'm not really super familiar with what that is, but so I was somewhere around a 6 or an 8. So that wasn't going to work out. And I was like athletic and stuff. So you have to be you can't really have too much muscle. You have to have a certain look to you. So I let it go. It was always a dream of mine. I watched like America's Next Top Model, and I wanted to be that, you're 13, whatever. So, but I let it go. I lived my life. And then I had my son when I just turned 19, mm-hmm. and I was a full-time student, a single mom, and I was working at a sports bar and not making a lot of money there, and having to be out till 2 a.m. and then go to my full-time classes and all that and still be a mom. And I was like, this isn't working for me. So I was like, modeling.
So you decided to like jump back into the industry.
Yeah. I was like, I have that in my back pocket. So I just sent photos into a local agency in DC, and then they're like, yeah, come in and sign. So.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So you get signed, and how old were you when you got re-signed?
20, I think.
Okay.
So yeah, so I've been doing this like 5 years now.
Okay.
So I signed in DC, and then I also signed in Philly, and so I would drive back and forth. A lot of driving involved in modeling.
So talk to me about, because I think a lot of people are kind of in the dark with how the modeling industry works. A lot of times models are signed to different agencies.
Yeah.
And then they also are placed into a specific, I guess, genre or style.
Yeah, like a market. Like they kind of decide
market,
what you can do best. So like there's commercial, there's fashion.
Okay.
You know.
So what did you get placed into?
I mean, with my height, I started doing a lot of runway. So like Neiman Marcus and Saks and Nordstrom do a lot of like shows like year round and stuff. So I would do that. Sounds pretty
fancy.
It sounds fancy, but it's really not. It's like just at local department stores, and they'll put on, I mean, it's fun, super fun, but they put on little shows with like beauty trend shows. Like Nordstrom does that, and they do that every season to talk about, they bring in reps from every makeup company, and they talk about all the trends for the season and stuff. So I would do that, or like if a designer would come in and do a trunk show, which is where they bring clothes and then you basically wear them around the department store.
Interesting.
Yeah, and just live model, I guess. So
how often were you doing stuff like that, like the trunk shows?
At least like once a week, twice a week.
So you were getting regular work as a model.
Oh yeah. And then I was also in school, and so it worked because modeling, your agency, your agent approaches you and says, "Are you available these days?" And you could say yes or no. So obviously, if you want to be a working model, you need to say yes to everything, though.
Sure.
Otherwise, they'll forget about you.
No kidding.
So,
did you find that balance difficult when you were having to work all these jobs and also balance obviously being a mom?
It was extremely stressful.
Okay.
Extremely stressful. And so when I get stressed out, everybody's body reacts differently. I get terrible acne.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's a huge problem for modeling. So you can literally see that. And that was actually something I had to overcome. And then you eat, like people, when they're stressed, they either don't eat or they eat more or whatever. And your body's always changing. And so I'm trying to balance full-time school, spending enough time with my son, and then making sure my body isn't getting completely out of control and looking consistent in my skin and my face. So I truly had to figure out how to be really comfortable with myself and to get over that, so that my face and like my like body image and stuff, I was just cool with it. I was like, this is me, and
oh my God,
you got to deal with it. So
yeah, that's super fascinating. Yeah. So talk about like you were mentioning that you worked at a bar. What was the financial, like compare your financial situation as a model versus working at a bar? So I can imagine there's a pretty vast difference.
There's a big difference. Yeah. And so it was a college bar, and they would do like, it was a wing place. Okay. And we would do like dollar bottles, like, Bud Light or whatever. And so the tips weren't that great. I'd probably walk out with maybe less than $150 a night.
Wow. And how long were your shifts?
I would go in at 3 and be out at 2.
Oh my God. So 11 hours.
It was really long.
That's really long.
And then I had homework and all that stuff. I was like, I can't do this every day.
And being a mom.
And I don't have any money to show for it.
Oh my God.
I was like, gotta figure something else out. So modeling is really awesome in the way that the jobs are pretty inconsistent, especially when you're starting off. They get more consistent, when you become like a go-to person, I think, for your agencies. But starting off, you might only work once a month. And that's really discouraging too. So, but I would basically, modeling allows me to maybe work once a week, twice a week. So I feel like a stay-at-home mom now, but it hasn't always been that way. So there's a range of like how it pays. So like runway and stuff at those department stores that I was mentioning, that's a lot less. And you have to do that a lot more frequently.
Okay.
But then like a commercial shoot or, you know, a fashion shoot, the day rate is usually a lot better, maybe like 3 or 4 times better than that. So I would say I would make at one show at a department store 2 or 3 times what I'd make in an entire night at the sports bar. And I would sit there and get my hair and makeup done and then walk down a runway. And so that was super cool. I was really cool with that.
Right. No kidding.
Yeah, that was
I'd be cool with that too.
Yeah. And that seems really awesome and easy. And it is, if you are comfortable with yourself. If not, there's all of this mental anguish that you have inside, like that you're like, I'm not good enough. And you start comparing, you know, yourself, and it can really like break you down. So it's like, you truly have to weigh how, is it worth it? To how, because some people can't handle that or deal with that. It's really makes them uncomfortable with themselves or self-conscious and stuff. So
did you always feel that kind of like mental anguish and anxiety and insecurities since you well, I mean, since you got into the industry, was that something that was just like omnipresent, or did it kind of build over time until you realized like, oh man, this is really taking a toll on me?
So at first, when I wasn't getting a lot of jobs, I wasn't very confident in myself. Once you start getting more jobs, though, and I did, that built my confidence. And then I started being like, okay, I'm in DC, and I was signed in Philly, so I would drive up to work in Philly, and then they also like worked in New Jersey and stuff. So I'm really close to New York City, and I would also be working sometimes in New York City. And then so of course my brain is like, oh, I'm going to work in New York City. And then so I submit to agencies in there, and I got denied by all of them. So that was extremely discouraging.
Sure.
And then I'm like, okay, what's wrong with me? So then I'm like, okay, my measurements aren't right, because I'm extremely thin. I have a healthy body image now, but at that time, this is maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, I was like, oh, I should get skinnier, and I should start eating a little bit less and see what I could do. And I should start exercising. And so it can really turn into a bad snowball effect. So especially if you have a lot of other stuff going on and you don't get around to exercising, and then you're comparing yourself, and then you're like, oh, I'm a huge bum and I'm a piece of crap because I'm not doing it. It's like, it can really be a slippery slope. So when I had my eyes set on New York City, that was probably the worst mental place I was in, because I wasn't eating enough. I wouldn't ever say I got to a dangerous. I always have tried to like be aware of myself. I don't think it was too dangerous, but I definitely did get way too thin. And when I finally let that go, of that idea of being in New York City or whatever, I got more healthy again. So that was really cool. Yeah, I can't even remember what your original question was.
No, that makes sense. It sounded like it sounds like you were tying, the lack of jobs coming in to like the measurements and like the physicality of it. And that might not even be the case. There's so many variables and factors.
And you know what? You never know what look somebody's looking for. And it might not be your measurements. But I mean, I did go and get a meeting with a couple agencies, and all of them did say I had to lose weight. And I looked like this, which is just absurd.
That is absurd. That's what really kills me as a photographer. And I've talked about this on my social media and things like that. But it's fun to create these, like fantastical images,
Right.
And the caveat there, though, is that you're kind of perpetuating insecurities without even knowing it, because some people take that at face value, and they're like, oh, she looks like this all the time, and they don't know the amount of retouching and the makeup and or what I looked like when I showed up to work, which is very scary, because we show up without any hair or makeup. You have to show up with a clean face and undone hair, and it's not good. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with admitting that, but nobody looks like that in their real life, unless they put some time into their appearance. Absolutely. It's definitely a slippery slope, and that's why I value kind of showing behind the scenes and what goes on as a photographer, and then why we're doing this podcast is because I feel like people need to know kind of like the darker sides that goes on behind the industry.
And when you say like, so that's a struggle that I have actually is, I don't want to make people feel insecure like I have before, you know what I mean? And I don't even necessarily look like an image that has been retouched or whatever, you know? I don't like, you know, I have skin problems and they're never going to let that go in a photo. If it's for something, they're going to retouch that. Sure. You know what I mean? And so that's not how I really look, you know? And so I kind of struggle with that. I'm aware that I'm perpetuating that issue by simply having this career, even though I'm not the one retouching or doing anything like that, and I'm just trying to be myself and make money and have a job just like everybody else. So, but I really want to figure out a way that I'm not a part of the problem. And it's hard because I don't have creative control over things, you know, I just show up and I'm supposed to be fit into their, you know, image or whatever. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. So, it's difficult. That is something that I think about a lot. I'm very conscious of that.
Yeah. And I feel like, you know, the industry, there are certain industries that are worse than others when it comes to perpetuating that kind of like unrealistic standard, beauty standard. But what I love about what your philosophy is that you are kind of interested in more than just like you're taking advantage of the fact that you're a model, get your money, you know, like do what you got to do. But you're also wanting to explore your creative side, being behind the camera, kind of like exploring your creativity because you know, like for example, I shot for an agency a couple years ago and we had a long day where we shot a bunch of models. And one of the models that I shot, she was in high school, I think. And she had aspirations to become a model. And her mom was there with her. And I told her, I was like, listen, it's great that you want to model. Like, I don't want to knock anybody that's interested in going into that industry, but be aware that you're worth so much more than how you look and how others perceive you based off of your like phenotypic attributes. You know, like you have something else to offer. Right. And I think that message is kind of lost and it needs to be like emphasized more.
Yeah. And I think about that a lot. And it's like, it's really it's been difficult for me to come up with a solution to that. And I feel like, you know, I love modeling and I'm very thankful for all of the opportunities it's brought to me, but my looks or whatever aren't what I like most about myself. And that has really been something I've had to do some soul searching to figure out, you know, and so I struggle with my job and kind of your job is kind of who you are. And I like the person I am and my personality, and it's tough to have that show with this job because it's just photos, you know? So, you know, or my creativity or whatever, because like I said, I'm not in charge of, you know, what the creative, like, you know, direction is of anything. Absolutely. You know, I just show up and
yeah, it's just so limiting.
Yeah. And so, I think it's important to explore like your one, even just for money's sake, you need to have a backup plan because there is an expiration date on modeling. Absolutely. You know? And so, and I've been told it's about the best look for like commercial modeling is you have to look between 25 and 35, and that's the sweet spot. So you look like, you know, an adult woman, you know, right. And I guess that's maybe the most relatable looking age or whatever. But when I get out of that looks range, I'm going to need to find something else to do. And so I'm actively always thinking about that. And it's worrisome, you know, when I don't have a direct answer for that now. But I know I have a couple more years at least, hopefully. So
that's so funny.
I try to relax.
I totally understand about sort of like that expiration date and kind of wanting to have a safety net because unfortunately, yeah, like the industry is like, okay, you're no good to me anymore, and you're like, what do I do now?
Right.
So it's nice to have like something else to rely on besides the physical beauty,
Absolutely.
So that makes sense. I want to jump into talking about agencies in general.
Okay.
So I view a lot of agents, I don't think all agencies are this way, but a lot of agencies that I've heard of and I've done research on, I'm kind of like, what exactly do they do for models? So like, and you don't have to like specifically mention any particular agencies, but how does that work? Like, what is an agency supposed to do for a model, and how do they represent them?
So when you sign with an agency, it's generally exclusive to the area that they have. So you can't be with multiple agencies in one area. So, and so I have 3 agencies now. So I'm with Directions in North Carolina, and they cover North Carolina, South Carolina, and like Atlanta and like the Georgia area and all that. And I'm pretty sure anything like south of Richmond. And then I used to have a DC agency. I don't anymore. And then I still have an agency in Philly.
Okay.
And so they do like Philly and New Jersey and Pennsylvania and all that stuff. And then I have Chicago. And that's all that area. And so they can't, each agency has like agreements with each other. So if you are with multiple agencies and an agency goes into another agency's territory and like books you there, that's a big problem, so they all have like agreements with that. But basically what your agency is supposed to do is to, when a client comes to them, they're supposed to, I think, gather up, this is my idea of an agency. I've never worked at one.
Okay.
But I think they're supposed to gather up all the girls that they think would be of interest to the client, and then they send them to the client. And hopefully, I would be in a lot of those. I don't know. So, but
it just depends.
It depends on what they're looking for.
Gotcha.
And so, and that's another thing. You can't take things personally. So, you're not going to be right for every job. So that's what an agency does. So if you're right, they submit you, and then it's up to the client pretty much to decide if they want to use you or not.
Gotcha.
But what an agency should do for you is get you work, right? If you have a mother agency, so that would be your main agency, they can sign you out to other agencies if they think you would be good for a different market.
Gotcha.
So, and then I believe they collect a certain amount from every piece of work you do that they've signed you out to. Like, even if you work with a different agency, they're still going to get a cut from that. And basically, in my opinion, I'm so happy with all of my agencies that I have. And I'm not sure I would feel the same if I had a New York agency, because I think it's a pretty well-known thing that models are pretty it's almost like disposable up there. There's so many people, like that's the place to go. I don't know, but there's been some issues with like agencies not vouching for their models. Like it doesn't feel like they have your back. I feel like any of my agents would have my back if I went to a job and was uncomfortable or was being like screwed over in some way or being treated improperly. If I reached out to any of my agents, I know that they would have my back and they would try to do the right thing. They would vouch for me every time. So that's also really important. It's like you should feel valued by your agency, not like they hate you or something.
Right. Or or they're out just collect a piece of your check. Right. Because I'm sure there are some agencies that like might not be as involved as they should for every model's job. And then they're like, hey, give us a little commission.
Absolutely. And I have had an issue with that. And I've had to let an agency go because of it.
Good.
Because they weren't getting me work, yet were taking a cut from all of the work I was doing. And that was the work I was putting in, and I was hustling and, I was reaching out to other agencies, and they weren't doing their job as a mother agency. So I had to let them go. But it's kind of, it's tricky because basically an agency collects 20% of whatever a model makes. Okay. And then if you're a mother agency, they get 10% of what the agency that got you that job. So then they'll split 10 and 10. You always get 80% as a model. That's like the general thing. And so if you have a mother agency that's not doing their job, they're still making money off of what you're doing,
right,
even though they're putting in absolutely no work. And that's not right. So that's a potential issue, which I've resolved personally, but I think that, you know, a lot of other people probably are stuck in a bad situation like that. So
sure.
that's a potential problem. But
I feel like, so you've definitely spoken on like the positives of why someone would want to go through an agent, especially because if a person, like a model, is not particularly business savvy and they don't want to have to deal with clients directly, sure, then I can definitely see that. But it's interesting because in 2019, I feel like we're living in such a different landscape compared to even like the early 2000s and before. Because think about, like, if let's say you're a band and you want to get your music out there and really take off your career. It used to be that you would just want to get signed. You would want to have a rep and then they'd take care of you and get you out there, right? But now, not that that's not an option, but what I feel like is a more viable option is you just go straight to consumer. You are putting your music out on SoundCloud, on Spotify, on YouTube, like everywhere, because now people are listening to the music everywhere. There's so many different platforms.
Right.
And the middleman is cut out. And it's not an essential part anymore. They're like the gatekeeper in a way.
Right.
And it's really exciting because what always has gotten me and what's been frustrating to me about the agency model is the fact that they are so restrictive. And they...
Like in what ways?
Well, for example, in the music way, it's like if a rep from a record label is like, oh, this is not what we're looking for. And it's like, but they're not representative of the market necessarily.
Right.
The market decides if your music is going to be good or not. Like if people like it, they like it.
Right.
And but you're at the mercy of that middleman who is the one deciding if your music has value or not. Versus now it's like you put it out there, see what works.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I think the only thing that makes that different between like the music industry is that it comes back to sample sizing. And so like every clothing company ever, when they're shooting like merchandise, it's in a certain size and it's a size 2 made for somebody with my body type. And so agencies ensure that that's like, sometimes people's photos online don't match what's in person. So I think when a client comes to an agency, they know what they're going to get because the agency certainly keeps the girls in check and makes sure, you know, you have to come in for digitals and you have to
How often do you have to update your digitals?
I think like as often as you can. And so it's kind of a safety net for, I think, a client to make sure that the girl is really going to look the way that they want them to look. So I think that's the only thing that would stop like maybe like Instagram models from being like hired for like maybe an actual company, maybe like a startup company or something. That would be ideal. And you know what? That's great. Like but that's a whole like separate, the sample sizes have to change in order for like other body styles to be used for like e-commerce stuff and, you know, just to shoot samples, you know, on models. But, and I'm all for that because it's so, I always think about this too. I'm like, how did we get off on size 2, 5'11"?
Yeah.
Like, how is that? Like, because there's
like, who deemed that the ideal standard?
And I'm really thankful to be like,
the ideal,
to like match up like in that, you know, but it's like, is that really ideal or is it just what we've like settled on? And it's like, people are just like too lazy to like change what the sample size is. You know what I mean?
It's also a matter of culture too.
Yeah.
Because I think I saw some article or something where it was like people Photoshop their ideal like height and weight and they compared it in different cultures. And of course, America was pretty thin.
Right.
But there are other countries that their ideal the ideal body size and body type is a lot like curvier.
Right.
Which is interesting.
And on the internet, when I go on Instagram, I don't post as much as I should, but I go on and I read comments. Like, that's what I do. I look at photos and I'm like, this seems controversial, and I go straight to the comments and I see what people say.
Yep.
I just like to hear what people's opinions are. Yeah. I just like to get a little survey. And so people are obviously, we all know, like, rejecting this like ideal, right? It's like, oh, let's accept everybody is beautiful, you know, and it's true. Like, what? How is this like?
Yeah.
It's really mind blowing to me. But it's just, so maybe the public feels this way and is rejecting it, but it's just like, when is the fashion industry going to change? Yeah. Like, you know, because it can't change just based on everybody being angry and fed up with it. It's got to be the people that are actually in charge.
Absolutely.
You know?
And I think that's, there has to be a trickle down effect, especially because, you know, there are people like you who are passionate about that, and you're like, hey, this is not necessarily the ideal standard, and there's a lot of negativity and insecurity in the industry, but this is the same hand that's feeding you.
Right.
So it's like, do I want to go against and jeopardize my financial future?
And I think about that and I'm like, well, I better have a backup plan before I do something like that. But that's not in my plans right now. But I do think about that, you know, and I'm like, well, I also worry, when is this going to get rejected, and when is it going to happen overnight, and then I'll be out of a job? I don't know. Well, who knows?
Yeah, there's a lot to think about there for sure.
Right.
I want to talk about commercial modeling versus, you know, the fashion industry and fashion modeling. So I think especially on Instagram, a lot of the popular photos that you see are the creative, you know, like, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like like fashion editorial Vogue, and I can see why. It's beautiful. But it's really interesting. It took me a couple years to figure out that there are models that aspire to be on the cover of Vogue, and or even just want to be like Instagram famous, and they don't quite know what the financials look like. And they're like, well, you know, I'll just work for a brand and they'll pay me X amount of money. And I think that's slowly starting to shift. And I think it's really interesting because sooner or later, I think the market's going to crash, like sooner rather than later. And when that happens, a lot of companies are not going to have the budget to pay an influencer. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And I think, but where the money has always been, at least in some form, is commercial.
Right.
And I think I want to talk about that because I don't think that distinction is clear. And I think people are like, well, what does that mean, commercial modeling? So can you talk about that realm?
I have, like, you know, I work with other models, and so I hear things. And I've never done Fashion Week in like New York City or anything like that, mainly because I do have a 6-year-old son, and I think that requires a lot of what if time. You know, you're going to go-sees and castings, and with no guarantee, and you're putting a lot of time. And what I've heard is that unless you're like a A-list model, you're not getting paid for those. You're probably going to get an article of clothing, if you're lucky, from the designer, but you are walking for exposure.
Right.
You know? And so for me, I have no interest in fame whatsoever. I truly do this because it's a job. You know, I make good money doing commercial modeling, which I'll get into because that's where the money is. And it's consistent because you work with the same clients over and over. Like, a client will hire you and I'll get into that in a second. Right. But I think that helps me a lot, that I don't have the desire to be recognized, because then you get caught up doing things for free and for exposure, which can be really lucrative if you get seen by the right person.
It's just a crapshoot, though.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I've been lucky enough to find just the right market and the right agencies where they are getting me in front of commercial clients. And so that means what I do is, locally. So I work for Cato, and I work for The Limited. Those are both shot locally in North Carolina. And those are consistent clients for me. And I would like to think, and this is a question I have for you, this is leading up.
Let's do it.
I would like to think that When I work with a client, a commercial client, so I'm doing like e-commerce, so, and like catalog stuff. So that'll be like what you see online, like, you know, when you're shopping online or whatever, or their catalogs or whatever. That's commercial modeling, or like an ad, or like for like ads and stuff. So not the high fashion, like runway, like, you know,
any kind of product.
Exactly.
Right.
So when I generally work with a commercial client, I get hired back, and I think it's because I like to think it's because I'm pleasant to work with. Like, I'm not a complainer. I'm a positive person. I'm there to work. I'm not lazy. I'm a hard worker, you know. And I think people recognize that and want to have me back because they know that I do my job properly, you know. But that's actually something I wanted to ask you. Like, how much of a part does that play for you if you're thinking about somebody that you want to work with again, or that you would recommend to a client? Like, you know, as a photographer, you know, because I'm sure people ask for recommendations.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like the talent that I work with.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, and I've actually been really lucky because I've heard some horror stories from other photographers. And I like to think that when I work with models, I'm like laid back and easygoing. So I hope that I can like bring that out of them too.
Right.
But it's because there have been people that are not necessarily like just straight up rude, but you can tell they're like, I don't know, just not about it. And especially if it's a job that we're both like there for, and we have like something to get, there's an objective. Yeah. It's not like we're both having fun. Yeah. We got to accomplish like what we have to.
Right.
And if they're not all about it, or if they're not like, I'm not saying you have to be super enthusiastic, but
well, you should be. It's your job.
I mean,
that's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly helps. It's a huge part for me.
Yeah.
So talk to me about. It's funny. I have this. Literally, the talking point I have written down here is talk to me about your hatred for social media, but that doesn't necessarily have to be true. Yeah. Or is it?
It is.
Okay.
Well, first, I don't even know what would be first. Here's something I can start with. So this seems like there was a big boom with needing followers. Like, everyone's like, oh my gosh, I'm getting my followers up. People were buying followers.
Oh, were? They still are.
Still are.
Every day.
Like, I feel like that was like, there was a boom of that where like everyone's like, oh my gosh, I need to get my followers up, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm hearing things about designers asking how many followers you have, and that being something that you need to like fill out. And like, you know, and in your agencies, I mean, I have such this, we all know social media is an edited thing of yourself. When you're a model, it's about how you look only, right? So, but I think, I don't know, I like to connect with people and talk with people, and I hate only being thought of. I don't know if people only think about looks with me, but I hate the possibility that that's the only thing people are concerned about. And so I also have this thing of, you're editing yourself to look a certain way and look perfect, but that's not real. Then, like we said, perpetuating people's insecurities or whatever. Everybody does that when you select the best moments of your life. Sure. Not just models, but everybody's doing that, and they want to look better than other people. It's like it's a weird competition. It makes me uncomfortable. And my value that I get out of life and connecting with people is I'm an open book, and I certainly don't have a perfect life. And so when I meet somebody, I'll talk about like something that's imperfect in my life right off the bat, because I feel like it opens up a conversation, because sometimes people feel like they can't talk about problems they're having. And I just want to come across as like a real vulnerable person. And so when I get on Instagram and everyone's on there pretending that they don't have problems and they don't have like flaws and things, it doesn't match up with any value that I have for life. And it just goes against like the person I am and what I want to stand for. And so
How often are you posting on Instagram?
I'm not often enough.
Okay. So when you get
and I don't even have like a number to say that, like, because it's so inconsistent.
So this is proof then that the jobs that you're getting are not relying on your active social presence.
No, and that's probably because I've established some clients. I'd like to have more. So now I'm like, okay, I got to go to the gym and I got to go get digitals taken. And this is all in the back of my mind.
Sure.
And I'm like, okay, I'm going to post more on Instagram so people, so I can reach out to more clients. But, which is important. I mean, it's my job and I need to advertise myself. Yet,
there's a balance.
And I can't quite figure it out yet.
I don't think anyone truly has, because this is a new frontier for humankind. Like, there's never been a time like this.
Right.
Where we have to deal with, it's instant gratification.
Yeah.
And it's constantly, we're literally addicted to our phones.
And it's an actual alternate reality. I mean, it's literally a different world that we're all living in. And it's like, it's separate from real life. And it's just as real, if not more real life to some people.
Yeah.
And I've been there mentally before, where I'm like more focused and I'm like in my phone. And that's also, I think, because of my son. Like, I want to be engaged in real life and not on my phone. I don't want to be one of those moms, like, and my job keeps me on my phone. I have to have it. And then so, it's really, really tough. I
want to talk to you about this article, a podcast actually, that I listened to recently. And it was, they had a conversation with one of the Facebook engineers, and around 2000, so it started as a social network, right? And it was I think the intent was pretty modest. It was like, hey, let's connect people,
right,
and like show pictures and whatever. Around 2012, I think they met with like, I don't know who it was, but they kind of like designed it specifically to mimic casinos and the behavior that, like, what makes people continually pull the slot machine. So
it's like you can't win with those, if you ask me.
I've probably pulled like 3 times in my entire life, but but Facebook has come out and said, like, it openly admitted that they designed it around this time so that you're getting specific dopamine hits every time you see a notification.
That's sick.
It is. And one of the engineers actually left because he was like, I can't do this. This is terrible. And the thing is, though, is like, we're so far gone past like the point of no return, I feel like. Not to say that I feel like you can't wean yourself off of it, but when people say, oh, I'm addicted to my phone, they're not exaggerating.
Nope.
And I have noticed myself, even, there have been every little micro moment. If it's like a 3-second window, I'm at the grocery store and I'm waiting in line, phone out.
Right.
If I'm at the stoplight,
look around anymore.
Absolutely. And it's a problem. And going back to like feeling depressed or anxious, I think it stems from all of the constant comparing yourself, and you're just bombarded with images, and you're the one seeking it out because you're like looking at your phone waiting for a notification, and then you're greeted with your news feed and someone's in Bali or someone's doing something looking real good. They got like a nice tan,
like the place.
Oh my god.
Yeah. It looks gorgeous.
Like 10 years ago, maybe less than that, like the tourism board in Bali is probably like just balling out right now. Everyone wants to go to Bali.
Oh my goodness.
So it's really interesting. And I've actually enacted or implemented a 1-hour social media limit on my phone.
Good for you.
As of like just last week. So I'll keep you posted on that. But but I noticed that already I feel this sense of like relief.
Right.
When you're suddenly not connected all the time. We'll see how long I can keep this up, but it really makes a difference.
Right.
So it's just crazy.
It is crazy. And honestly, so those shows that it's rare that, like I work with like other models on set. I'm usually the one for the day, or maybe there's another one. But like when I would go do those shows at like Neiman's or Saks, they have like 10 models maybe. And so we're all sitting around, everyone's taking turns getting hair and makeup, and then there's conversation. Every conversation revolves around Instagram and how many followers or how bad it makes people feel, or like, and then you should hear like I think this is everyone.
Sure.
But like models especially, when they get together, it's like tear yourself apart time. It's like literally like insane. And it's like, oh, well, like you're like,
I noticed that.
And it's like, so.
I noticed that.
And I do it too. And then you're like hearing people tearing themselves apart. So then you want to put yourself down. And it's like, oh my God.
This is a race to the bottom. Like, you're a piece of shit. I'm a piece of shit. Like,
exactly. And it's like, wow, there's a real, I mean, I have a friend and she's one of my dearest friends and I love her so much. And she finds herself comparing herself on Instagram and she always has to get off. And then she like, well, she'll get back on, like, she'll delete the app and then she'll like get on the internet version on her phone.
Addiction. Yeah.
It is, but it's like, if anybody else did that, they would do the same, had to delete, like they would do the same thing. And it's like, oh my gosh, look at this person. And let me tell you something. There are multiple people I've met in my life that really look very happy on Instagram. And I think we all have. Mm-hmm. And you meet them in person and they have the worst freaking attitude you've ever seen in your life. And you're like, absolutely. This person is laughing and smiling in every Instagram photo, yet they're complaining about like everything. It's like, it never matches up. How could it possibly match up when it's just a few photos, select photos? And so it's like, we know this, yet we can't help but still compare ourselves and still believe it. Mm-hmm. Like that, it's insane. And so that's another thing. So I value my mental health over Instagram, and I always will.
Good.
And so unfortunately, if I could stay on Instagram and promote myself a little bit better and spend more time doing that, maybe I'd have a little bit more, I don't want to say success, but maybe I'd have a few more jobs.
But what's the cost? You know?
But what's the cost?
Right.
Is it ruining the rest of my life? You know, in the meantime, with the focus that I have on Instagram and like, oh, I need attention and I need, you know.
Absolutely.
And it's like, I don't know.
I have two things to say on that. One, and I posted this yesterday on my Facebook. There are a couple of tools that I use now. Mm-hmm. One is called Flume, and this is not like a sponsor or whatever. Like I don't want people to think that I'm getting paid to say it. I just use it. It's called Flume, Flume, and it's an app that you can have on your computer that lets you navigate on Instagram. And what's cool about it is you're able to check your activity. You can even answer and message people, but it's a little bit clunkier. And I suspect that it might be by design, because if you're using it on your computer, it's harder you can't really scroll. It's like you have to click and stuff. And so I think it's like, realistically, I can't delete the Instagram app from my phone or whatever, but I can use it on my computer for the most part and then do what I have to do.
Answer messages.
And not spend all day on it.
Can you post?
You can't post on Flume, to my knowledge. But the other tool is called Later, and it's later.com, I think. And they have a free plan where you can make 30 posts a month and schedule them in advance. And you can also put your hashtag, there's like hashtag research. You can schedule your stories. Like you can actually post stories through, and it's all on your computer. I think that's a premium plan feature, but really cool, because instead of trying to be on my phone all the time, I'm going to start planning things out ahead of time and then stay focused. Because you go on suck.
And then you're scrolling all of a sudden. And then you haven't even answered any of the messages you went on.
I know. I totally forget. And the second thing I wanted to say was, so I can hear Luna slobbering. We have our little puppy drinking some water very aggressively in the background. So sorry if you hear that. So the second thing I wanted to mention was, so I've been doing daily meditation for, I don't know, like maybe 6 months now. For the most part, every single day.
Are you using Headspace?
Headspace.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you use it too?
I've downloaded it.
Start using it. It's amazing. It's really easy. It's a guided meditation app. I highly recommend it. But he begins every meditation with like a lesson. And some of the lessons are just like so profound, so simple, but so profound. And one of them, I'll never forget it. It was called Storylines. And he talked about the stories we tell ourselves, and think about like the experiences you've had your entire life, and how something that happened to you as a kid or as a teenager has kind of shifted and like, dictated how you think of yourself. And then you start building and solidifying that storyline. So, the moral of the story here is self-talk is so important. I used to hear this all the time, like, oh, positive self-talk and positive affirmations. And I kind of dismissed it as like, oh, frou-frou. Yeah, of course you want to tell yourself you're good. But it's the opposite too. It's like if you continually are talking bad about yourself, that affects so much more than just your mentality. It like dictates your behavior. So when you're telling yourself, like you're talking about your friends saying, oh, well, I'm like this and that, like you can't, that affects so much.
And here's another thing. So remember when I was saying everyone gets together and it's like a competition of who sucks the most?
Yeah.
So, I'm on set, or this happens a lot, and it's like really disappointing, and like I'm aware of it, aware enough to talk to you about like this like process or like what happens like so often. Yet it still happens. And like as a model, like you'll have, I can't tell you how many times somebody on set that isn't the model, you'll be like, oh, I wish I had long legs like you. I look like a troll or something. It's like, what? And it's like, no, like you're beautiful. Like it's like, and then it's like, I have to get in and be like, oh no, like, well, like look at all the acne I have on my face or whatever. And it's just like, but then I'm still looking for something bad about myself.
Right.
And so are other people. Like everybody struggles with this. You know what I mean? And it's like,
I wonder what you can do to combat that.
Do you know?
So the idea that I have is if someone is telling you, hey, I wish I had your long legs, I look like a tree stump or something.
Right.
I wonder if you could reframe that for them. I mean, and of course, in a genuine way.
Yeah.
And remind them. Instead of bringing yourself down to that level, like bringing them up to the level that you are. And
well, I'm also thinking those types of things about myself.
Right. But I think verbalizing it in a way that's exaggerated, especially like, oh, I'm a troll.
Right.
That really affects everyone. Yeah. It's really interesting though.
It hurts me. Like when people talk badly about themselves, it hurts me. But then I find myself doing that about myself as well. It's a bad cycle.
I mean, I literally called myself a Chinese goblin before this. When I was telling you that I was like, I don't want to be on. Which is really a
funny term in general. Like I've never heard that before.
But that was mostly in jest.
Right. Mostly.
Mostly. But yeah, like it's true. Like I think that self-talk is a huge thing.
So huge. Yes, that's such a good point. And that's definitely something that we all can work on.
For sure. What other questions did you mentioned that you had a question for me, or several questions for me? I wanted to make sure that you got in a few of those.
Well, here's one. I think we've kind of already talked about it, but do you think we do more harm than good as an industry?
I think as an industry, probably. But I think it starts at the individual level.
Okay.
And that's why I'm so passionate about what I do. I'm slowly shifting from the photography, just offering photography and video, into more like trying to provide a solution for the bigger issues.
Right.
And I think that it took me this long to kind of like build my skill set as a photographer and artist and gain credibility.
Right.
Because you can be super passionate, but if you're talking to an empty classroom,
right.
But when you build up your reputation and credibility, then people are like, oh, he has something to say and he's done this kind of work. So he's not just another critic, but it's like, no, I've been in the weeds. I've worked in this industry. I've worked with models. I know these are problems, like real problems. And I want to slowly like start making a change.
Right.
So, and that's what I do is with my captions. I'm trying so hard to, and I am fully aware that my captions are like way too long for a lot of people. And
I don't think so. I really enjoy, and you know what? People write really long captions, but it's like soapbox stuff, and it's like, okay, you know what I can't stand? It's like, this is the real, like people will post like models be like, this is like the real me, and then they're like trying to like make the like so it's like, you're not accomplishing anything. Like what? So now you're trying to say how bad you look? It's exactly the same, but when you write your captions, like, I just feel like they're so uplifting, and you're not talking down to anybody, and you're not saying cliche things, like, and you have like open like questions, like how you can help people. Like you are genuinely interested in providing help and positivity to people. And I think that's incredible. And I would love to be able to follow in your footsteps. And I'm still trying to figure out how I would do that as a model, because I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't do the exact same thing you're doing, you know?
No,
but
sure.
It's like, I think it's great.
Thank you.
I read your captions and I'm always like, oh, like that's, or I was like come away feeling that's so sweet. Or like, he's out here, I was like encouraging people,
sure,
you know, and it's, I don't know.
Thank you.
Keep doing what you're doing with that.
I appreciate it.
That's awesome.
What I would say for your platform, because like you're in a position, because you were talking about like, oh, sometimes I feel like, I'm not sure what you said exactly, but like you're the ideal in the modeling industry, like being 5'11" and thin. And I would say, comparing it to, this could be way out of left field here, but like I was lucky enough to grow up with very supportive parents and like living a middle class life. And I grew, like when I got into business and entrepreneurship, I was like almost ashamed to admit that, because you come from a place of privilege and like good circumstances, and that's not an interesting story, you know? Or at least that's how people think.
Do you
like,
find yourself downplaying, like you try to, and
I used to.
Yeah.
I definitely used to. Now not anymore, because I think it's just fair to be honest.
Right.
And say like, well, I didn't start from nothing. I didn't like eat scraps from the dumpster in my neighborhood. Like I actually ate pretty well.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there was that guilt. And I think I'm just comparing it to your situation where like you are a working model, and I can understand why you might be reluctant to almost not talk bad about the industry, but kind of like shed light on the darker parts of it, while also being that ideal model and getting the jobs that people want to get.
Because it sounds ungrateful.
Right. But I think that that's an important distinction to make, is I think it's possible to be honest and raw and transparent while not being ungrateful.
Right.
And still just kind of emphasizing like, I'm fully aware of my circumstances. I'm grateful for them.
Yes.
But this is what I believe needs to change. And I think, I mean, not to say that you should be on Instagram more if it affects your mental health, but recognizing that you do have that opportunity, no matter what platform you choose, Facebook, podcasts, you know, Instagram, whatever, to convey your message. And I think what's really cool about this too is that a lot of people don't have they're just not willing to spread that message, because they're scared, because they're vulnerable. They don't want to be seen as, you know, they don't want to be judged or criticized, which is going to happen no matter what you do.
Right.
Like, I think recently I posted a picture. I don't know. I get comments from people, and some.
Do you?
Yeah, some of them are like, I'm like, come on, really, dude? Like, you have to completely shit on me and my art. But I've started to realize, like, you know, people are just gonna view how they want to view you. Yeah. And the way they viewed the world is just like shaped by their experiences, and like maybe he had a shitty day, so who knows? But
you cannot take anything personally.
Yeah, but I just feel this immense responsibility to encourage people and like let them know what's real. And and I'm a photographer, so I have a very specific like unique viewpoint, and so do you as a model, wanting to get into the creative, like behind the scenes. And like you told me, you're interested in working as like, what did you say, like being involved in production.
Yeah.
And utilizing your creativity.
I haven't had, because I've been so like maxed out on my time with, you know, being a mom, full-time student, and full-time model. I haven't had any free time until pretty much this year, which I've been neglecting a lot. But no more excuses for me. And it's time to kind of explore like my other talents and like outlets for like art and stuff. So I need to do some more exploring to figure out what I want to do. But I know that I do love film, and I love media, I'll say. And having this be my first podcast experience, I really loved this. I loved this conversation. I loved that. Like, I feel like we are being real and we are shedding light on things that people aren't necessarily talking about. Mm-hmm. So that feels good. And like, I'm going to carry this feeling. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like inspired to just, I think I'm going to get back on Instagram and maybe start using my platform a little bit more.
That's good to hear. And you can always schedule your posts if you don't want to be hooked on your phone.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have one last question for you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know which version I want to ask. I'll just ask this. What advice do you have for people who, let's say younger models that are, or younger aspiring models wanting to get into the industry? What advice do you have for them to kind of make sure they stay on the right path?
It's really easy to lose yourself as a model because, like I've mentioned before, you're on somebody else's creative watch. You're not in charge of anything. You're literally, being directed into, you're the model. You're being molded into whatever. And so if you can recognize that you're not very sure of yourself or very comfortable with yourself, you have to keep checking in with yourself in this industry because you can get really lost in other people's opinions of you. So once you start valuing that above your own, that's a red flag. So you just really have to check in with yourself because it can really destroy how you feel about yourself. And I realize, and it's so, anytime I talk like this, like about this industry, it's like because of the privilege aspect, it's like, oh, well, I'm supposed to be the ideal beauty, the ideal of whatever people think is beautiful. There's a lot of weird mental pressure that it's really hard to describe. And I think that like until you're in it, it could come off like you're just like full of yourself or feeling sorry for yourself for no reason. Mm-hmm. So I just think that you have to really be in touch with yourself and your mental health and put that first before anything else. And kind of, I'm 5 years in and I'm kind of just learning this now. And I feel like our conversation has strengthened this. Like, you should have a purpose beyond just being recognized, like if you're going to have a platform or fame or be recognized in some way, you should have a message, that right. You're trying to bring and better this world.
That's great advice.
So that's probably, it's check in with yourself and have a positive message. Those are probably my two things.
Awesome.
That I arrived at over the course of 5 minutes.
No, that's great. That's great. And I actually lied, but this is an easier question. Okay. Where can people go to, what's your Instagram handle? I'll just say that so that they can follow you.
So it's _ Katarina Pavic. So it's KATARINA PAVIC. And I'm going to post more now.
Now that everyone that's listening to this, they're going to follow you and they're going to hold you to that.
Great. I can't wait. So
accountability is the key to success.
Accountability is awesome. Yeah, yes. Awesome. Let's do it. Let's have it.
I really appreciate you coming to the show. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.